So hello, everybody. Welcome again to the Doomer Optimism podcast. Speaking is Twitter Anon and former guest and now co-host Anarcho-Contrarian, or I guess AC for short. That's what's been done in the past to avoid the mouthful. And here with me today is co-host, also previous guest, Miss Julie Fredrickson. So Julie, say hi. How are you?
Hello. Otherwise known as Almost Media, I guess, if we're going with our online personas.
Very good, very good. So today, Julie and I are joined by a man that we both admire greatly and who we really think the Doomer Optimism community should know if they don't already. So Mr. Ben Hunt. Ben, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, AC. Thanks, Julie. I see that there's this pattern here of guests becoming hosts here. So
you're locked in. You didn't know that was coming your way. So we sprung it on you. So Ben, as I mentioned, Julie and I, we've been long on Epsilon Theory and your work in general. But for those who haven't been or aren't familiar with you, if we could just start with the basics. Who is Ben Hunt or Nebtna?
Nebtna, right? My alter ego.
Yeah, tell us a little bit
my
about
Black
you.
Mirror alter ego.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about you, your work. And then maybe at the end, if you remember this multifaceted question, the narrative machine. Tell me what the narrative machine is.
You bet. Well, look, I've been a lot of different people, I guess, is the way to describe it. As I'm sure is true for both of you as well. I started as a political scientist of all oxymorons. I got my PhD up at Harvard and I taught for 10 years. And my field was trying to understand narrative. It's the same stuff I do today. Except there I was trying to understand how governments mobilize public opinion before taking on some sort of risky action, like starting a war with someone. And what I found in that research was that I don't care what kind of government you're talking about, from a democracy to a communist government to a dictator, whatever the form of government is. All governments go through this exercise. And you can track this. I looked at newspaper editorials because they've been the same purpose and they've been the same, they've had the same usefulness of being out there explicitly to try to change public opinion for a couple of hundred years. So it doesn't matter when, it doesn't matter where, governments make this effort. And that was my thing in academia. But I suspect, like a lot of your listeners, probably like the two of you as well, I also had this entrepreneurial bug, right? And it is a bug, not a feature, if you're afflicted with it. So left academia, left a tenured spot to start a software company. I was a programmer on my own, right? Self-taught, all that stuff. So started a software company. Also dealing with, I'll call it unstructured data. Right? See that this is going to be the common thread that goes through academia, the software companies, and the investment world that I've been in for the last 18 years or so. It's looking at unstructured data, trying to identify the patterns and the structure. I'll come back to what I mean by the structure of narrative, the things we hear, the things we read. That's what I mean by unstructured data. Anything that can't fit into a spreadsheet. In our investment world, it's anything that's not price or volume or, something you would get from your Bloomberg machine. That's been the common thread. So I started the software company, sold that, and did some venture capital for a while. And a friend of mine was working for a larger asset manager. Said, "Hey, we're always talking about markets because that my methodology, right, in academia and then in the software company was applications of game theory." He said, "Look, public markets, the stock market, this is the biggest game in the world." Right? And that's what it appeals to me so intrinsically, trying to understand the puzzle of the stock market. It's the biggest game in the world. Okay. So joined this firm. We started a hedge fund internally in 2005, and we actually did really well with it. We did great in 2005, 2006, 2007, and we did really great in 2008 when nobody else or a few other people did. So the money came flowing in after 2008. We got up to about $1 billion in this hedge fund. But from early 2009 forward, our returns flatlined. Very similar story to, I think, a lot of anyone who's been investing professionally or personally since the great financial crisis. Right? Our shorts got killed. Our longs did just kind of the way everyone else. We never lost money for our clients. I'm still very proud of that. But by 2012, it was clear that what we were doing just wasn't working. And what we were doing was, catalyst-oriented fundamentals, trying to understand companies. Didn't work. So we gave all the money back to our investors. And I was able to step back and I go, well, how do you manage money today? Or how can you manage money today, especially other people's money, right? For what matters, which doesn't seem to be fundamentals. Well, what does matter? So that brought me back to, my academic research, the software company, all of this to try to understand, well, I think it's that old notion of narrative and narrative structure. And so that's what I've been working on for the past, 8 years, writing about it in Epsilon Theory. That's the blog and the website where I write about this stuff, trying to understand politics and markets through that lens of narrative and game theory. And, we do research as well, trying to develop investment strategies based on this. But that's the narrative machine you're asking about, AC. What we like to call it a microscope, right? Because what we're trying to do is we're trying to visualize and measure an invisible world, this world of narratives and how people talk at us. We know this invisible world exists, just like the world of microbes exists, but we can't see it easily. So what we've tried to do is try to build the instrument to actually visualize it and measure it, because maybe then we can do something with it, right? And what I've come to believe from the last 8 years of, frankly, a professional career of trying to build this microscope is that the analogy of narratives as being like microbes is very apt, is spot on, right? I really, after all these years, these decades, I actually think of narratives as like living creatures with a life cycle that you try to identify, how they're born, how they grow, maybe they multiply or divide, but they ultimately all die. At some point, they all die, right, to be replaced by another narrative. So that's what we mean by narrative structure. We're trying to identify the life cycle of a narrative. It's very different, I think, than what you would typically hear people say when they're talking about narrative. I find that usually when people talk about narrative, they're focused on sentiment, right? And they might specifically kind of measure individual words. Oh, are you using nice words or mean words, to describe something? And I got to tell you, AC, Julie, I don't think that's very useful, because I don't think that is what impacts our brains. Because we all know that we're in, that these narratives motivate us and change us, but it's not because you're using nice words or mean words. What I think it is, and this is what I mean by structure, is what's the story arc? What's the script? We call it an archetype. And the best example I've got of this is think of the TV show Law and Order, right? Any police procedural will fit for this, right? But Law and Order, they've had over 600 episodes filmed. There are only a dozen scripts, right? You change the names, change little temporal details around here now, and 12 scripts can get you 600 episodes. It's the same thing in markets. politics too, by the way, but it's absolutely the same thing in markets. There's a finite number, it's more than 12, right? But there's a finite number of scripts that we use over and over and over again to talk about companies, to talk about investments, to talk about asset classes, to talk about we'll call them an entity. But that's what we try to do in our research. We're trying to build that microscope. Right? We call it the narrative machine. It's really a microscope to try to look at these microbe, virus-like, narratives and trace their life cycle. Because depending on where you are in the life cycle, it has a very different impact on our behavior as investors. So anyway, long-winded introduction, but that's me and that's what I do.
That's perfect. And you use the term microbes and virus, and I'm thinking in my head, unless people follow your work, what the output of the narrative machine, quote unquote, looks like. And so, do you still use net-based quid? Is that still the product?
So for our research now, we've built out the entire stack. So we license the raw unstructured data, the media data directly from Dow Jones and Thomson Reuters. Mm-hmm. And then we've built out all of the processing engines ourselves from different open source projects. We still use net-based quid in some of our publishing because they have a wonderful visualization
Exactly. That's
module.
What I was getting at. Yeah.
Right. So to make a pretty picture of, and I don't mean that, pejoratively.
No, it's powerful.
Seeing is believing, right? So it's very powerful to see a network representation, because that's basically what it is, right? It's a network. It's a picture of a network. But it communicates, I think, really well what is the core insight of natural language processing, the engine we're using to try to parse and go through to understand structure. When you see it, these kind of maps, you see the clustering. I like to describe it as like, star maps, right? Because that's what it looks like. It looks like galaxies and galaxy clusters. And there's something really to that, because what it's representing here is the gravity, the connection, the strength of connection between words. Because words really do spread like a virus, right? A phrase.
I have to ask.
Yeah. Go, Julie. Go say, yeah.
I feel like everyone in tech is excited about Snow Crash because it brought the metaverse. Right, the actual fun part of Snow Crash is that it is a virus that infects the minds of computer programmers.
Exactly.
And the whole arc is trying to get that out of the heads, because once you control how we perceive stories, and it literally is done as a virus, also interlaced with there's a fun aspect of narrative machine within that, because the viruses are literally words. Like they go back to Sumerian cuneiform. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, there have been a couple of good, I'll call them kind of thriller books written on that premise. Right? And
give me a reading list. It's my favorite genre.
I'd love to. Well, the kicker, though, is that the more I am immersed in this world of narrative, I think is actually really accurate. It honestly goes back. You're familiar with the whole notion of what is a meme, right? And this goes back to, you take this back to Richard Dawkins, right? That it's the selfish gene, right? That it's not. We're just carriers for these things. That the real kind of building block of life or information or meaning is like our DNA, or is like a meme. And this is weird, but I see these memes and these narratives as alive as you or I are. Right? It's like just on a different wavelength of light. It's just a different world. I call it narrative world, but it is just as real as our world of atoms, right? And what is the kicker here, and it is a little, can get kind of epistemological or the like. The reason I think that this narrative world exists, that memes are alive and in the real sense of the word, is that the human animal is evolved to be this is in the scientific sense of the word, right? A social animal. There are only a few species on Earth that are, it's called eusocial, EU social. That's the name of the world. And those species that are really the most successful species on the planet, right? It's us, it's Homo sapiens, and then it's termites, bees, and ants, right? And there are a few other species, but basically that's it. And they happen to be probably the 4 most successful species on the entire planet Earth. Now, what's at the heart of being a eusocial, a technically social animal? Well, there are 3 or 4 characteristics. For example, we raise multiple generations of the species, raise the brood in the same nest. All these words are used for insects, but it's also, very much true for humans. So there are a number of these kind of characteristics, but the most important one is this, that we are dominated, our brains, our nervous system is physically evolved to respond so powerfully to intraspecies communication. We literally swim in an ocean of messages that we give each other. It's just we do it with our words and not pheromones, right? But it's exactly the same thing. So Julie, I take very seriously this notion, frankly, that words, they really do hit us here.
In the beginning, there was the word, turns out to have maybe been quite literal.
Maybe quite literal. And yes, there's an Epsilon Theory note on that, right? That the creation of the word, anyway, that's a whole nother wonderful discussion to have, right?
I could go down
right?
the full rabbit hole on that one. In my head, I'm thinking, I need to reread Once and Future King, because King Arthur has to go in with the ants and their entire language is done, not done. And that turns out to be a pretty viable framework for communication.
But look, let me bring it into something that I think all of us are aware of today, which is that when I say that it has this direct impact on our brains and the way we're wired, what I'm talking about is our neurochemistry. Right? And it is not science fiction. It is science fact that the most successful corporations and governments in the world today intentionally design their communications to hit a dopamine response or a norepinephrine response, right? It's the dopamine economy. This is what we mean, right? When we say that Facebook designs its algorithms for engagement. I'm looking at Twitter, and I'm getting ratioed on this this stuff I was probably on COVID, which is always the thing that brings out the
fight or flight response.
Yeah, the fight or flight response. Because what people are getting from Twitter here is not to agree with someone. We enjoy scary movies. We enjoy, I like to call it a rage engagement. We enjoy getting angry. Right? So much of our modern economy and our modern politics is built around this incredibly effective use of and intentional use of words to trigger our neurochemistry, right? Whether that's making a bet out of everything, right? That's the other really powerful, dopamine response we get. Turn everything into a bet. Like, let's gamble on anything. Turn everything into an engagement, right? Which is typically that, some of it's like, but a lot of it is mean face, right? A dislike. Doesn't matter. It's engagement, and that's the power of words. My point is that these words have a pattern to them, right? Is there is a script, there is a demonstrable and measurable pattern to how these words are used. And once you start thinking in those terms and measuring those patterns, those libraries, the magic words, right? But you can try to protect yourself from others using those spells on you. That's the main thing I write for, right? Yeah. It's not to, oh, I'm going to turn you into a wizard, right? So you can analyze the narrative and tactical, day trade your portfolio. That's not it. Right? What is it? I mean, there's an aspect of that too. Don't get me wrong. but the real, I think, utility in what we do is to open everyone's eyes to this invisible world.
So don't invest without having a ward, because people's chaos magic will tank your portfolio.
There you go. That's right. Don't invest. Don't vote. Right. Don't to navigate this. So AC, you brought up my alter ego Neb Tana. Right. It's my name backwards, of course, and it reflects how I feel and how I act when I'm not actively trying or not actively aware of this alienating world, this alienating ocean of narrative and messages that we swim in. Right? Neb Tana has a hard time connecting with his wife and his children. Right? Neb Tana feels very at home in a world of Turing tests, on Twitter. Neb Tana is very good at Twitter, right? But Neb Tana, Ben Hunt, I lose myself in that ocean of messaging and engagement and the like.
Okay.
And when we lose ourselves, there's a big price to pay.
Yeah. So this is we're getting on the cusp of some of the big topics that I want to talk about, but I wanted to just quickly put a pause on it. So we talked about the stuff of narrative, right? Sort of, I guess the science, if you will, of narrative.
Yes.
And before we take the next step into your takes on the narrative, just a little bit more table setting. So, and I think just because it'll resonate with our audience. So Ben Hunt is a gentleman farmer. Is that a fair title?
A dilettante farmer. That's the way to describe it. It's like a stock comedic character, Yeah, my grandfather was a real farmer. He was a dairy farmer. He would he'd have a big laugh to hear me describe myself as a farmer. Big laugh.
So, and you're also a homeschooler, correct?
Correct. Great.
Right.
I mean, it's we, and that's the royal we.
Sure.
My wife has done 99.9% of the work around that. We've been lucky enough to be able to do that. And but yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's important. So much of our audience, those 2 points hit really well, and I think, that setting the table will make a lot of sense in some of the things that we're about to talk about. And if I could tie it back in maybe towards the end, is like, why have you chose those lifestyles, right? Maybe,
yep.
I'm supposing that it's in response to some of the narrative takes you're about to give us, but that's for us to get into a little bit more in a second. And then the other little bit I wanted to point out. So in your Twitter banner or in your profile, you have a quote from St. Augustine, which I really think resonates with, the message or the theme of Doomer Optimism in general, right? So, and I loosely introduced the term to you when I reached out to you to try to land you for this gig. The Doomer aspect of Doomer Optimism are, the feeling that we have about various degrading and or collapsing systems, and we have folks who think that's primarily climate or primarily social or primarily political or primarily economical, the whole gamut. But the optimism side is that we think these things will bring about positive change in a lot of ways, and a lot of that has to do with human-centered, human-scaled returns that we need to make, sort of a revival of our roots in many ways. And your quote from St. Augustine, if I can read it, which is incredibly boring to do on a podcast, but hope has two beautiful daughters, anger and courage. Anger is the way things are, and courage to see that they do not remain as they are. So that to me is pretty Doomer optimism. So before we get into some of the narratives, I just wanted to ask the general question, like, how does Doomer optimism resonate with you?
Yeah, I think I'll bring you to something kind of another quote from a little more recent, right? From it was a fantastic book, an okay movie, and a great TV show, and it's Friday Night Lights.
I just watched the whole thing thanks to you.
Good for you. See, right?
All the way through.
Right. And, for those of you, and I bet most of your audience is familiar with the show or the book, right? And it's about high school football in West Texas, which is to say it's about life. It's about life. And the catchphrase, right? The phrase from the coach, clear eyes, full hearts, can't lose. Clear eyes, full hearts, can't lose. And I write a lot about that phrase because to me, it brings into today's world, yes, that Augustine quote, which is probably apocryphal, frankly, right? He probably didn't say that, but it's attributed to him, so it's fine. Right? But I'll give you two other pretty smart old boys who said something pretty similar. Clear eyes is Socrates, know thyself. Because that's the hardest part of clear eyes, is to see yourself with clear eyes. Full hearts, man, that's do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That's the golden rule. That's full hearts. That's treating others as autonomous human beings, not as a means to an end, but as a person in full, with a moral and ethical weight equal to your own. Now, both of those guys, Socrates and Jesus, they got killed for saying those things. Right? So we got to be a little careful. We got to be a little careful here, right? But clear eyes, full hearts, know thyself, treat others as you would want yourself to be treated, as a person in full. Do that. Can't lose, man. Can't lose. And it doesn't happen from the top down. It can't happen from the top down. Because you know who treats you as a means to an end? Mm-hmm. A corporation, a government, a political party. You are a means to an end. What has to drive, I think, any sort of resistance, right, to the Doomer forces. So what drives any sorts of optimism in the face of this, which is the same thing that faced Augustine, right? He was sitting over there in North Africa. He was from Italy, right? He was from Rome. He saw how the world was coming down. It took a couple of 100 years. These things don't happen quickly. It's not some, vive la revolution. No, it's just this slow winding down and collapse. We're seeing the same thing. And and unfortunately, I really don't believe it's something that you can fix. Certainly not from the top down. What you can do is find other people, find your pack, I like to call it your pack, right, who will treat you as an autonomous human being, and you're going to treat them the same way. You're going to treat them, you're going to look at the world together with clear eyes, you're going to look at yourselves with clear eyes, and you're darn sure going to treat each other with full hearts. And you find that pack, whether that's your family, whether that's your friends. All I know is what it's not, right? Your pack is not your corporation, it's not your political party, it's not your government. right? But you find that pack. That's how we get through this. That's what gives me optimism, to the point of Doomer Optimism, right? In investing, I'm a short seller. It's my favorite comic book character is this. He's one of the Inhumans. His name is Karnak, right? And he's the most powerful of them all, even I think more than Black Bolt, right? This is getting way off the rails. But anyway, he's the most powerful Inhuman. You know what his power is? He can see the flaw in all things. Right? What a great power, right? There's a power in that. But it's only a power that doesn't end up eating you away from the inside if you can couple that with finding your pack so that you can make your way forward together from the bottom up.
Absolutely.
So yeah, awesome. It resonates a lot with me, AC. It resonates a lot.
Great. That's great. And I would definitely want to get to the optimism, but I want to get a little bit into the weeds on the Doomer side first.
Okay. Sure.
So you have some great great terms for what I feel it is the sort of the Doomer side of things. So things fell apart.
Yep.
The widening gyre, right?
Yep.
And the long now. So how did things fall apart? How did the gyre widen, and what is the long now?
Well, I'll kind of take each of them in order. So things fall apart and the widening gyre are references to old stories, right? So the old stories have a real power, and what I try to do in my writing is to put this wonderful old wine into a new bottle. Things Fall Apart is a wonderful novel set in Africa. And it's about, as the name implies, how a society breaks down. And it was really written by a man and through the experiences of the Nigerian Civil War. It's not about that, but you read it and you see that's what he's talking about, how things fall apart. And it's the same idea as with the widening gyre, which of course is the poem about how the center does not hold, and the notion of that we seem to be kind of spinning, whirling dervish-like and kind of going apart at the edges, and that's very apt, right? Because the dynamic of narrative, as it's being, I think, applied, particularly in the political sphere today, is intentionally to polarize us. And that's particularly damaging when you live in a nation like the United States, where our political system was designed. This is the old political scientist in me again, right? So it's designed to favor the middle. Our structures don't work if there is no middle. If there is, and kind of, warning $10 phrase term, a bimodal distribution of preferences, right? If there's no middle, if there's just kind of local, maximums way on the left and way on the right, our system does not work. And yet we have both the media system, we have political entrepreneurs, we have this proficiency with using words and narrative structure to hit that dopamine receptor, that norepinephrine receptor. And what I see is us being driven more and more to the fringes, to the edges, to the periphery, so that the middle does not hold. And ultimately, my view is that this does get cashed out in politics, that ultimately things do fall apart. And I don't know what form that takes. I have no idea. But I can absolutely see that pattern occurring, just like Augustine saw it, in 400 AD. That's where I think we are. And I think that the technologies of today further that dramatically. But it's not a mean reverting phenomenon, right? It's not something that just gets better over time. On the contrary, and this is the point of those notes that I'm writing about, it's a very stable, again, $10 word, equilibrium, meaning it doesn't change on its own. It only changes after enormous pain.
Yeah.
Right? So, again, that's not a timing prediction. Like I say, it took, a couple hundred years when Augustine was noting about this until we.
So you're not
the
Harry
Vandals sacked
Spellman.
Rome. No, not at all. Not at all. And I.
This is actually what I wrote about in my mini manifesto.
I kind of am. That's what we named our company, was Second Foundation Partners. That's the name of my company, Second Foundation Partners. Because I do believe in psychohistory, and I do believe that there is a pattern to this. But where I look at that the Foundation Trilogy was the most impactful thing I ever read. And I agree that the decline, you can't stop it, but you can shorten it, right? That was Harry Seldon's goal, not to prevent the great collapse, right? But to keep it from lasting 10,000 years, try to make it only last 1,000 years, right? And I think that's the best we can do. I really do. It's a very long game I think we have to play to keep alive the flame of individual autonomy and small L liberalism. That's what I'm about. Small c conservatism too, right? These are those principles that I think a society can be not only founded on, but grow in a way such that it fulfills our individual human spirit. So anyway, that was a lot of big words and long talk, but that's what I try to write about.
Dovetails exactly with so many of the manifestos that people have been putting up, where nobody has a clue how it's going to unravel, merely that the math is kind of inexorable on it. And mine was very not eloquent in the way that yours was, but I said, if you do not fuck around, you do not find out. Because fucking around is the process of smashing yourself against the local maxima to see if it is even possible to get out of the current equilibrium.
That's right, Julie. It's, this will get into the homeschooling conversation, right? But I think the most important quality we can try to pass on to our children is courage. It's to be brave. And I don't mean brave in a top-down sense of, marching off to war, right? I mean bravery in that very personal sense. Of what you're talking about, Julie, of having the courage to say, nope, I'm going to step back here and I'm going to think for my own damn self.
Let's find out.
Hey, let's find out. And and I'm going to try. I'm not going to give myself over. And this is what it's a pet peeve of mine, right? Not let ourselves give ourselves over to learned helplessness. Right. So there's the learned helplessness experiments. They did them on dogs. I don't think you get this experiment approved today, right? But you're familiar with this experiment where you've got a dog. There's a short barrier between the two sides of the room. The room floor is metal, can be electrified. You send an electric shock. You see how big of a shock you need, how quickly the dog responds to jump over to the other side to safety, right? And as part of the experiment was, well, what if we're shocking both sides, right? What if there is no safety? And the idea of learned helplessness is ultimately the dog stops trying to escape the shock and just lies there on the floor and just takes it. And that's what I mean about courage and bravery, not giving ourselves over to the learned helplessness. There's another COVID variant. All right. We, pull up our pants, we deal with it. You know what? Does it mean that, our life is more difficult and is more, yep, sure does. Does it mean we're not able to do X, Y, Z? Yep, sure does. Get over your bad self. Let's do it. Let's get up and do it. So it's exactly that, Julie. It's not letting ourselves be absorbed into the very pleasant Borg, right?
Resistance is not futile.
Resistance is not futile. It never is. Never is.
So you just tied something together in my head a few minutes back with golden rule and financialization that I hadn't figured out until you just said this, that if we're dealing with abstractions like a corporation or a government or a market, we can't treat people as if they're people because we're not actually dealing with people. So one of the reasons I love private market investing, especially at the very early stages, I can't really get too far into the numbers. It's basically, do I think this entrepreneur has a chance of executing? And so much of it comes down to the trust and psychological support. Whereas the further you get from actually talking to the people that make the thing that you've invested in, the less it's even possible to apply the golden rule. And in my head, I was like, oh, that's what financialization means.
No, that's exactly right. So we live in a cartoon world. And I use that word cartoon again in the technical sense of the word. A cartoon is an abstraction of an abstraction. And cartoons are intentionally created because they're extremely effective. They're an extremely effective conduit of the words, the images, the memes, right, that are these little earworms that absolutely act like a living organism inside our head. So it's an intentional effort. Smart politicians have known this forever. Now everyone's in on the act. Everyone, right? Every banker, every Tom, Dick, and Harry, local politician, every corporate CEO, because it works. It works. And resistance to the cartoonification of our world is, I think, what all of us have to do and it's hard, right? I mean, all right, I don't know if we're filming this or not, right? But I'm holding up my smartphone. This is my dopamine machine, right? I'm hooked. I'm an addict. I kid myself that, oh yeah, I'm on Twitter because, it's good for my business. I'm like, no, man, it's a rush. It's a rush, right? And so what I'm saying about resisting the cartoons and, not swimming in this ocean of abstraction, I'm speaking as a sinner, right? Not as a saint. Another interesting story about Augustine, right?
But not quite yet.
Right. Yeah. That was Augustine's thing back when he was, living it up in Rome. Lord, make me chaste, but not quite yet. Right? Not quite yet. And so I'm speaking as a sinner, not a saint. But I do find personally, and I suspect a lot of your listeners, viewers will feel the same way. What is resistance? Is resisting the cartoons, is creating a critical distance between yourself that that you're being played. Right? Because that is the old saying in poker, right? If you've been playing for 30 minutes, you don't know who the sucker at the table is. It's you. Yeah. I'm not saying stop playing poker. Right? I'd say just don't be the sucker at the table. Don't be the sucker at the table. Don't take it into your own heart. I think that's the best we can do. It's not to, abjure the world as it is. It's how can we be in the world as it is, but not of the world as it is.
How can we resist abstraction? Really, I think is sort of as simple as that. And
it is.
You're hitting like the right nerve with me. Like I think that the way we participate politically is an abstraction. The way that we participate with an economy is an abstraction. The way we participate with our food is an abstraction. The way we participate with our community online is an abstraction. Like the things that we should be doing should be a reversion from abstraction to, the physical world, direct arm's length interactions.
That's right, AC. It's real people. It's real world. And we talk about there's a phrase I like to use. It's called industrially necessary.
Yes. Tell us about the eggs.
It's about the eggs. It's about the eggs. Right. So, I am this dilettante farmer, right? It's our animals truly are pets. Right. That's the way to think about them. Don't raise anything for meat. So it's but I like animals that pay the rent. Right. So we've got chickens, we've got sheep. I've got bees. We've got a couple of horses. They don't pay rent. That's fine. We've got goats. I love the goats. They don't pay rent, but goats are just the best animals in the world. Goats are just, love the goats. But the chickens, which I don't like, right? I don't like chickens. They're, little dinosaurs. But, having chickens, and of course having the eggs, I had this really interesting experience. And we'd have some extras. We'd put half a dozen or a dozen eggs, and we'd given to a friend. I'll bring some into the office, maybe give them to friends. And I could always tell, some people would get them and they kind of look at, shouldn't they be in the refrigerator? No, they're fine. And they'd look at it and say, oh, okay, because they're not. That with eggs, right? They need to be fingernail clean, right? Mm-hmm. You don't scrub them. They just need to be. You need their fingernail clean, and so they'd have some blemishes and some, quote unquote dirt, i.e., chicken shit on them. Shit. Right? And people would look at it and say, oh, well, I think those are bad eggs. And I can have this conversation with Blue. Says, well, no, actually, these are the best eggs you'll ever have, right?
Absolutely.
But what we have all been exposed to is the story that the good egg is the spotless, cool, refrigerated egg, and we've been so trained to believe that is the good egg, that we see any other type of egg, like an actually better egg, right, that's never been in a refrigerator and is only fingernail clean, we think, oh, that must be a bad egg. Now, the truth is, we have refrigerated, spotless eggs because it is industrially necessary, right? Given the protein farms we have today, and here I'm just talking about the egg protein farms. God forbid we talk about the other protein factories that we have in our world today, right? But given the way that eggs are mass produced, they must be refrigerated. They must be blasted, right, to clean them off. Not because it makes a better egg, but because otherwise they would be terrible eggs, right? It's industrially necessary to have them spotlessly clean and cool to the touch. But what happens is that because that's industrially necessary, we are then constantly exposed to the narrative that it's not just industrially necessary, that's fine, but that is the good egg, the better egg, when that is categorically false. And once you start looking for that, for the way in which narratives are used to transform what is industrially necessary into, oh, this is what's good for you, you'll see it everywhere. This is our public school system, right? I love our public school system, right? Don't tell anyone else, but I pay more in taxes than I do today for our schools and for our police and fire, for our safety. I'd pay more. This isn't I'm being taxed too much argument. That's not it. And I understand that the way that the public school is structured is industrially necessary. Right? That you must have that sort of schedule. You must have these procedures in place for the smooth operation of the school. It is industrially necessary as opposed to what's best for the child. I get it, right? But don't tell me that school system is then better than a homeschool system, right? That the public school system is the good system. No. It's what is industrially necessary. And I resent the messages that transform what is industrially necessary into oh, no, that's what's the best. But like I say, once you start looking for that, once you start looking for that transformation of what's industrially necessary into the good, and that transformation happens through narrative, you'll see it everywhere. And that's what I want to resist through my own individual behaviors, through what my pack does, right, is to resist that. Not because I'm opposed to public schools or, everyone having, fresh eggs. Everyone should, right? But don't tell me that is the best way to do this. Anyway.
Yeah,
sorry,
that's
got
great.
off on my soapbox here.
No, that's perfect. I'm glad you said it. I want to shift gears into, and you made reference to it already, but the counter narrative, right? So the pack, make, protect, teach, right? So to combat the abstract world that we live in, and the narrative that is forced on us top down, you recommend that we huddle up in a pack and we make, protect, teach. Can you unpack that for us?
It's as simple as that. Maybe when I say, and I have a very broad conception of what making is, what protecting is, what teaching is. Very broad. But let me tell you what it's not. It's not being a manager. I'm sorry, it's not. And that's okay. It's not being a lawyer. And that's okay. Right? It's not being a hedge fund manager, which I was and I probably will be again, right? And that's okay. Because what we do, this is what I mean about being in the world but not of the world. Right? I get it. I really am a dilettante farmer. I'm not a good farmer, right? I want to provide for my family, right? Maybe I'm a manager. Maybe I'm a lawyer. Maybe I'm a hedge fund manager. But that's not my identity. That's not who I am. Right? Who I am is someone who writes, who tries to teach, who does their best to try to make and invent, who does their best to try to protect those I can. And that's what Make, Protect, Teach is about, is to find your identity in that, in connecting with what is real, in connecting in something that's not a cartoon, an abstraction of an abstraction, but is something that is ultimately in service to your pack. Right? And it makes for a life worth living, AC. It makes for a life worth living.
Absolutely.
Right. That's what Make, Protect, Teach is all about.
That's perfect. And so did that, what's the best way to put it? So did you have a hunger for more tangible life? Is that what made you a dilettante farmer or
yeah.
What? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I wanted to do it for my kids. Right? I wasn't expecting the impact it would have on me personally. Right? I wasn't expecting the inspiration I'd find in the real. Because like so many things in life, AC, I mean, once you start looking for it, you'll see it everywhere. Right? Once you start looking for the cycles and the beauty and the pain and the lessons that occur in the real world, you'll see it everywhere. On the farm, in your land, you'll see it everywhere. But if you're not looking for it, if you don't know until you have that kind of aha moment, you don't have. It's the scales falling from your eyes, right? It's trying to see clear eyes, and then trying to embrace the world with that full heart. And if you do those two things, like Coach says, can't lose, man. Can't lose.
Yeah, and you don't know until you get your hands dirty the impact that it has on you. So, a little bit about me. So I actually had the sort of the opposite path, right? So I grew up on a third generation dairy farm in rural New England, let's call it that. And I'm a manager now. I look at what I'm doing today and I'm just like, this is an abstraction, this is an abstraction. And, Doesn't mean I'm not going to do the best job that I can do at performing this abstraction, but it's not tickling or scratching the itch that I need to be scratched. It's not real.
But look what you're doing, AC. You too, Julie. Look, you're doing this podcast.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Making
This is what's scratching
this
my
is
itch.
you.
Yeah.
This is you. This is your identity, right? So,
Absolutely.
we can all do this. And I think it's with our kids too, right? It's homeschooling. I know everyone can't homeschool. I know that. We're just so lucky in our situation that we're able to do it. But you know what we can all do? We can all be an active participant in our children's education. We can all do that. We can all do that. And we can all be an active participant in our own lives and not just give ourselves over to that ocean of abstraction and cartoons and just float the days away. We can we can protect, we can teach, and we take ownership of our lives with other people, other real people. And I think the three of us here on this podcast are doing it, and I'm sure so many of people listening to this are doing it. And we just got to keep on doing it.
Just got to keep doing it. So I don't want to take too much more of your time, but I did want to get to one topic, which again I think will resonate, and I want to leverage some of the the optimistic messaging that we're floating on right now. So your newest projects, tell us a little bit about Proof of Plant and the Green Protocol. In what ways are you trying to leverage this in an optimistic and productive future?
Sure. Well, it's so I'll just back up a second. So I am a coder, right? That was my background, right? Self-taught, and I've always done this. So I say that just to kind of establish my bona fides, right? With the crypto crowd. And I don't think that the battle that I want to fight, right, is on the field of money, because I believe that anytime, it's the old, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's idea. Once you start participating in the world in the field of money, right, you will be co-opted, taken over by Caesar, by Wall Street, we'll call it here, right? And that's exactly what I think has happened to Bitcoin, and crypto more generally, right? All of the goals and the meaning behind this, I subscribe to so wholeheartedly. For me, I believe I think is really the wrong battlefield. So I'm saying that as a premise. I do, though, however, share so many of the goals and ethos of that community, and it is a community, right? And I want to support it, and I want to be part of that community, even though I think that the world of money, which I've been involved with all my life, is inevitably absorbed by Wall Street and the state, by Caesar. I think there is a real potential, though, and this goes under the heading of Metaverse and Web3 and all this other stuff, right, is to think of crypto not in terms of currency, but think of crypto as writing the protocol layer for so many things that happen in our world. And so what I wrote in, we call it the Green Protocol, is a way to think about and to apply speculation and the dopamine economy, right, to supporting goals that we might have around climate change, and goals we might have about, better farming techniques, right? Anything that we care about to make a better world, I think can be supported by this protocol. And I think it's so important for us to write the protocol as opposed to the billionaires writing the protocol, because that's what's happening right now, right? The protocol layer for the next 50 years is being written by the freaking Mark Zuckerbergs of the world. And if we just let that go, that's what's going to happen. We're at a very interesting point in time, I think, where the protocol layer, kind of like the early 90s, where the protocols were written for the internet, the interwebs, right? The protocols for this Metaverse, Web3, whatever you want to call it, these protocols are being written today. And we need to have a voice in that. And we need to write them. So that's what that writing is about. I think it's the best stuff I wrote this year. So if anybody wants to check it out, yes, yeah. Green Protocol.
Fantastic.
I've actually been meaning to reach out to you about it because I spend 24/7 in crypto now, and I keep trying to figure out. People who are in crypto invariably tend to gravitate towards the politics of making and ownership, and there's a strong overlap in the doomer and preparedness crowd in crypto because they like the reality of, I can prove that I have built this thing. And if we could move it more into the real world of farming and actual production, there's definitely the metaphors gel.
They absolutely gel. I'll say though the crucial thing is, or this is what I wrestled with for so long, because once you enter that world of money, it absolutely gets corrupted and co-opted. Right? And what I was trying to do in this Green Protocol is to try to tap into, I'm going to call it that speculation layer, right? The layer of number go up, but to do it in a way that could actually fit within the world as it is. Again, it's trying to be how can we be in the world and frankly successful in the world and achieve our goals in the world without giving ourselves over and becoming of this world. Right? How do we maintain that Augustinian distance? He was able to stand over in North Africa. And look, we don't have that luxury, right? So we have to have a mental distance to try to, from the bottom up, make this world a better place for ourselves and our children. That's what we've got to do.
So let's pull on the children thread. I myself have young children. You talk a little bit about, the most important thing you instill in your kids is courage.
Try to instill. Yeah.
Try to instill. Sure.
Best you can do, best you can, right?
Sure. What's your take on the world that they're inheriting? Is it along now 2.0? Like, how do you think they will either improve or suffer because of the long now?
So this is kind of a weird thing, but the Epsilon Theory audience, who I write to, it started off with I'll call it the grumpy grandpa crowd. Right. So I'm 57. I've been in investing for a long time. The initial readers of this were, it's a grumpy grandpa financial advisor from, I don't know, wherever, St. Louis. Yeah. I'm picking on St. Louis. I don't mean to. Right? But it's definitely a grumpy grandpa crowd. And over the years, what's been the best and most gratifying thing is that my readership has gotten younger and younger.
That's awesome.
And what I see, what I experience, whether it's with my own children, whether it's the readership and we've got, it's more than 100,000 people, get our emails and subscribe to it. And so I feel like I get a lot of communication going on. Man, I'm optimistic about kids, my kids in general. There's an energy there. There's an energy there that is very special. It's that same sort of energy I think you see in that crypto community. It's an energy that, like all young energies, often kind of needs to step back a little bit and not think they're such hot shit, right? But I'm very optimistic about youth, right? Yeah, and where the kids are these days.
Kids are all right.
I'm really pretty optimistic. The kids are all right. Yeah, That'll date us. So so that's what I think in general, and I think the challenge though is going to be to find the right battlefields to express that energy and that effort, and because it's so tempting, and this is what political parties and big corporations count on, is they dangle in front of you this carrot of, oh, here's how you're going to matter. Here's how you're going to make a difference. It's going to be by campaigning for candidate X, or it's going to be for working for corporation Y. Man, that's how you're going to make a difference. And nothing could be farther from the truth.
Absolutely.
Nothing could be farther from the truth. So, that's the challenge, but that's been the challenge of youth for,
forever?
a couple of millennia. Forever. Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I think what gives me a little bit of hope is, it seems like they favor decentralization, whereas,
Yep.
my folks and in their generations, it was, bigger is better, right? Get bigger, get out, was the messaging in agriculture in the early 1900s. It seems like the kids these days favor decentralization, but it's a weird mix to me. Like it's that, but also like they buy into big narratives too at the same time. So I'm sort of two minds on that front.
Well, they, and I'm talking about my kids here.
Sure.
And then there are, my girls it says 4 girls from 17 to 25. And they, I talk about how my alter ego swims fluently in this, sea of abstraction. I mean, they really are fluent. They really do swim so easily that there are so few barriers between quote unquote the real world and these, meta worlds. And that's both a real source of strength to be able to move freely between these worlds, if it's coupled with, keeping a critical distance and always being able to reconnect with what's real. So, again, we've all got our strengths and weaknesses as an age group or as a gender or as it all really does, I think, come together though if we can, the things we all share, which is that inherent nobility and autonomy of mind. And if we just don't ever lose sight of that, don't ever give that over, because that's the thing, right? I mean, these liberties that we have, they're ours. It's not something that's ladled out to us from some central pot, right? They're not given to us by the state. All of these liberties, they're ours.
Amen.
They can't be taken away. But you know what, AC? You know what, Julie? We can give them away. We can give them away.
And we do for a little bit of convenience.
Often we do. Often we do.
Well, and sometimes that's not bad. Industrially necessary means more people can have access. There's an ethical spectrum on which it's not always clear.
For sure. I get it. Like, I don't begrudge the protein factories. I get it. I get it. I don't begrudge the public school system. I really don't. But what I begrudge is the difficulty in charting my own path, right? In maintaining my own autonomy and not being pulled into that Borg collective. Yeah, it was a great TV show because the Prisoner. I don't know if you ever seen it. Patrick McGowan, right? It's an old '60s show, Brit show. Anyway, you got to see it sometime. So look it up, The Prisoner. Now the catchphrase is, "I'm not a number. I am a free man," and that's a pretty good catchphrase. I'm not a number. I'm a free man.
Absolutely. All right, maybe the closing topic. Since you are the wizard behind the narrative machine, what's the shaping narrative that you see now? Like, what is the next narrative that we're getting ourselves into that we're swimming in?
Well, I'll focus on the economy for a second right now, because this is an enormous shift in narrative. Right? It's a shift in what I call the common knowledge, right? Common knowledge is a very specific term in game theory, right? It's what everyone knows that everyone knows. And that's what really shifts behavior. It's not when, oh, I think XYZ. It's when I think that everyone else thinks XYZ. And today we've had an enormous shift in the common knowledge so that now everyone knows that inflation is here. And it's not transitory. And it is real. And it is embedded. When common knowledge changes, behavior changes. When common knowledge changes, it doesn't change back. Common knowledge is a barge, right? We've been living in this deflationary narrative world in terms of economics for 40 years. I think we'll have a decade at least of this inflationary narrative. And that changes so much. It'll change our politics. You're already seeing that starting to happen. It'll change how we think about markets. Frankly, I think there's the silver lining to this is I think that this inflation common knowledge will force all of us to, frankly, move away from these market abstractions, these market cartoons, and start reconnecting with real assets.
Amen.
So I think that's the silver lining. I think that's where things are heading. And I think that's what comes out of what I'm seeing in the narrative, which is this enormous shift from a deflationary narrative about how the world works to an inflationary narrative.
Yep.
The great thing about real assets is it requires you to actually do real creative things.
To make, protect, and teach. You got it, Julie.
Yeah. Find your path.
Exactly right. Yep.
That's it.
Right on.
There's
AC,
some
thanks so
optimism.
much for doing this. Julie,
Yeah.
thanks so much for having this. This is just an absolute pleasure.
Absolutely. We appreciate your time so much. Just give yourself a plug real quick. How can people find your work if they don't already know you?
Epsilon Theory. That's on Twitter. It's on the website, epsilontheory.com. You can go online and see where that name comes from. But Epsilon is the error term in all of our kind of econometric formulas, except it's not error. It's all of this strategic interaction. It's all of narrative. We call it error, but it ain't, right? There's a pattern and a structure to it. And once you start looking for it, you'll see it everywhere. And I think it helps. So anyway, epsilontheory.com and at Epsilon Theory on Twitter.
Fantastic.
Highly recommend. You are one of the few media sites that I actually pay for.
Oh, that's high praise indeed, Julie. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ben. Ben, thank you for your time. I hope everybody follows you. There's just so much of your insights are so helpful. And again, so much of them ring true to the Doomer Optimist community. So thanks for joining us, Ben. We appreciate your time. Maybe we'll circle back if we find ourselves in a new narrative for your take. So
love it. Anytime. It was my pleasure. Thanks,
great.
everybody.
Thanks a bunch, Ben. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Julie.